This star is born inside a nebula, a giant cloud of interstellar gas, a beautiful sight to your retina when looking through a telescope's lens glass. Then the gas forms into a protostar, the hot nuclear reactions begin. Hotter than anything on Earth by far, hydrogen fuses helium within. Now the star must face a predestined fate. It could go and turn into a black dwarf. But a quadrillion years it'd have to wait. Supernova, black hole, stay a white dwarf. Dependent on the size, it will decide what tragic fate our star chooses to ride. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, we began our journey inside a nebula. But inside this nebula, something extraordinary is about to happen. Our extraordinary star is about to be formed, and this star is truly extraordinary, so its name will have to be none the less than Chris Farley. Now, let's begin our story. Young Chris was just a large amount of gas, floating around and minding its own business until one day, all of these gases decided to make something of itself. Literally. Chris had begun his development inside the womb, which in our case is a nebula, by becoming a protostar. A protostar is basically a collapsed interstellar cloud of gas that has formed into a really hot and dense core. From there, Chris's nuclear reactions begun. He began turning hydrogen into hydrogen ions. His temperature was large, millions of Kelvin. He knew in his spicy core that it was time. He began his main sequence, which lasted a painfully long 10 billion years. After all of this time, Chris managed to turn every last piece of hydrogen into helium. Now, unfortunately for Chris, he is not hot enough to turn his large collection of helium into carbon, for he is under 15 million Kelvin. So what does he do? He becomes a red giant! And when I say giant, I mean giant. Chris let himself go. He grew to be about 1 billion kilometers wide. So over time, his helium started to burst out and a gaseous shell formed around him. Chris knew that his good days were over and that this was the best it was going to get. He lost his hydrogen millions of years ago, and he was losing his helium too. Over time, Chris grew to be old. He was in his late billions and he was turning white in color. His long and euphoric career was over and he knew that eventually he would turn. He shined as long as he could and continues to shine a distant light on his section of the universe to this day. But Chris knows that it is his fate to become a black dwarf. He feels himself getting colder and colder every million years or so, and he knows that someday he will stop shining, only to become a black dwarf, invisible to all eyes. This tragic fate is inevitable, but luckily for Chris, it'll take a solid quadrillion years. And that is the story of the great life of our great star, Chris Farley.
When I was a boy, my mother often said to me, "Get married, boy, and see how happy you will be." I have looked all over, but no girlie can I find who seems to be just like the little girl I have in mind. I will have to look around until the right one I have found.